Yo, what's going on, you guys? You already know my name is Strozier, and it is time for a review of Andy Mineo's Neverland 2. This is the long-awaited sequel to his 2014 album, Neverland, which was a very big creative and artistic shift for him at the time of its release. Looking back at that 2014 release, it did show a lot of Andy's untapped potential as an artist, and after that, it was uphill from there. I will easily say that Andy has not only been one of my favorite rappers, but favorite artists ever since his formerly known mixtape. With every release since then, it seems like he has become more confident, more bold, more artistic, more creative as not just a rapper, but as a, what I like to call, artistic rapper. Just meaning that many of his music tends to transcend the genre of hip hop, which I think is really good. So obviously I was very much excited for Neverland 2, which was, I believe, announced back in 2017 or 2018, so it was definitely a long time coming. And he definitely built a lot more excitement with the preludes, the arrow, and the sword, which took me by a huge surprise on the first listens of those projects, especially the sword. Not only did he turn a new leaf lyrically, artistically, he exceeded measures that I just did not expect from him. And he followed it up very greatly with the Work in Progress album, which was essentially just a bunch of throwaways that he didn't think was good, and the Happy Thoughts EP, which was just another prelude to this album that we awaited. And I will say, to my surprise, this was the first time that Andy kind of seemed a little bit underwhelming on the first listen compared to his previous projects. Now, I'm not saying that this album was bad at all. There were just some times where he seemed a little bit unlike himself. Thematically, there were some cuts on this album that didn't really seem to fit, which is a surprise because typically Andy's track list sequences this very well, and every song is by the book to the theme of the overall album. Apart from the voice memos from his mom and the reoccurring "Andy, don't forget me" childlike voice, which is, if you know anything about Neverland, that doesn't need to be explained. There were some times where I was like, I don't really understand how this track fits the theme. It just kind of seemed like a filler track, which those filler tracks also sounded as if Andy was punching under his creative weight. So having said all that, we're going to go track by track so I can give you a further review, and of course, you are going to see it all. This was an absolute great intro to the album. It felt as if you were entering a new world with the samples from his home videos, the screams in the background, and the very touching voice memos from his late mother. Andy had various lyrical references to Neverland 1, the EPs that followed it, and various other songs, which I thought was very cinematic. And based off of the cover art and some other theories that I've heard, it makes me wonder if we will get 2 more EPs that are related to Neverland that possibly could lead to a Neverland 3. This also felt like a very clear continuation of a story because the beginning of this track sampled the outro of the last track on the sword, which was Shame. I really like how it blended together. The overall production on this track was absolutely magnificent. I love the choir-esque vocals that came through with the warping bass, and it also perfectly bled into the next track. Right back where we left off. This is probably one of my favorite tracks on the album. I love how they repeated I am falling. After a while, it sounded like a part of the instrumental rather than a vocal itself, which was kind of reminiscent of things that Kanye West tends to do. Anybody that knows his music is very familiar that he tends to use vocals as instruments. So I thought that this was a really big creative step for Andy, and it definitely isn't the first time he's done something like this. He had very sick flows and up-to-date bars alluding to COVID-19, Kobe Bryant's death, and the racially social climate that we had seen a lot last summer. I absolutely love the very comedic line about his pronoun being that guy, and the line where he said that Jesus saved him from Christians was like a huge slap in the face, like the pharisaical type of Christians that he tends to get in his comments a lot anytime he does anything. But surprisingly, after this track, the album took quite a few creative nosedives. This track was very infamous before it was released because of the sample clearance issues that had delayed the album for a second week. I was very excited for this track because we've gotten some pretty big bangers from Lecrae and Andy in the past, including Say I Won't, Background, Price of Life, and of course, Coming in Hot, which was added as like a bonus track on the album. Thematically, it doesn't fit anywhere, but I guess they were doing it for the stream, so go ahead, get your streams up. I feel like this track would have been really great if it was released in 2017 because creatively, Andy is far ahead of what this track is. I mean, he had a few funny bars in there, like I really like the COVID-19 bar, and then the one about his wife and jeans. I thought that was really tongue-in-cheek and a little risky, but hilarious. Lecrae's vocals seemed to be mixed a little bit low on the first chorus, but the second chorus seemed okay. And as far as his verse goes, it wasn't bad, it just wasn't that interesting. It was a little bit boring to me. And overall, I don't know what this track does thematically for the album.
Yeah, you know the drill.
I had a lot of anticipations for this song when I saw the track list. Wordplay did excellent on his verse with the references to Professor X, DMX, and XXXTentacion. I thought that was very creative. Also, his voice, just seems to like not get enough credit. The back and forth between Andy and Words on the second verse was fairly enjoyable. Andy threw out some hints to a possible Magic and Bird 2, which Magic and Bird 1, I guess you could call it, was very, very good at the time of this release, and it has aged very well. I just think that Andy has superseded the sound of that album. If we did get a Magic and Bird 2, it wouldn't be very great if we had it in the same style. I feel like a style more like the Shibuya Roll Call single that was released in early 2017 would be a better fit for Andy stylistically. But I did enjoy the little drill influence on the track, which was very fitting because seeing the title, I was like, if they don't put drill on this is just a disservice to the song. Not a bad track, but thematically, where does this track fit? This track was a much needed pickup from the last two songs, and I will say artistically and as far as genre goes, this song was very, very difficult to pin down, which I loved. It felt soulful, it had like an EDM feel, it felt like something I would hear in American Eagle or Old Navy because it had like that mainstream pop kind of feel to it. Topically, this was like a occupation versus relationship type of deal. His verses were very, very short but to the point, and it kind of felt elongated by the pre-chorus that followed them. And I absolutely love the simile between his phone and his mistress. This is the type of stuff that Andy does, which just showcases his great penmanship as an artist. The feature from Taylor Hill was excellent. His voice is perfect. It felt like I was lost in a kaleidoscope of all these flashing colors. And also the feature from Chandler Moore was nice. His deep supporting vocals were very, very low key but very, very fitting. I like this cut a lot. One of my favorite tracks. I feel like this can get a lot of commercial success, and I really do hope it does because this is an excellent track.
Nobody's coming.
This was the second single for the album. The interlude was great. The lyrical content was great. The lyrical content was great apart from the peace, peace line. I feel like this is a very, very overused line in hip hop. But the overall execution of the track was very, very poor. The singing felt very awkward. I mean, I've definitely heard better vocals from Andy before. Andy singing on this track was quite awkward. This song felt like a song that you would hear from a CCM artist on a Christian radio station. The beat drop was nice, very epic. I just won't be returning to the song anymore.
You gotta remind me.
This is more of a melancholy song, which I always tend to like. He had very, very intense storytelling about his communicational issues within his relationship. The pre-chorus on this was my favorite lyrical aspect of the song. Very, very hard-hitting and in your face. The feature from the artist/producer Jake was executed very well over this very simplistic yet purposeful instrumental. Overall, I feel like this is probably one of the most underrated tracks on the album due to its lyrical content, so great track for me. This song is a pure W. It's soulful, it's catchy, it's comedic. It feels like you're at a local music festival while the sun is setting in a hot Atlanta summer. Joseph Solomon's recurring "Not Gon Do" was very like sassy in a way, and I thought it was placed excellently. Both of Andy's verses were very slick, and I especially enjoyed verse 1, which kind of attacked the influencer culture that many people are getting into now. Great track, excellent. I hope they do a music video for this song.
It could be worse.
This is the first single from this album, and it's perfect. It was a banger from the first time I ever heard it, and it's still a banger now. I tend to sing like the hook of the song to myself anytime I have the most minor inconvenience because it's kind of like encouraging. This instrumental felt very, very motivating with the recurring trumpets and the hi-hats and the distorted bass that Andy tends to use on many of his tracks. Every line on this track was so purposeful. I love the stick line, I love the wristwatch line. I also really enjoyed the Bill Cosby and Ravi Zacharias line, especially the Ravi Zacharias one, because I know that Andy has talked about him quite often in interviews, and at the time of his death, when his sexual misconduct allegations, which were true, began to come up and just kind of tarnish his character, were very, very hard-hitting for many people within the Christian community. This will probably be one of my most listened to songs of the year, and it is definitely probably one of the best singles that I've heard of the year. This track could have easily fit anywhere within the track list of his 2015 album Uncomfortable. That really weird reoccurring high-pitched sound really seemed to make the instrumental, along with the beautifully stringed harp, I believe it was. This track is very, very relatable to myself, and I feel like it can relate to many other people. There are this many things in your life that you just kind of throw in the back of your mind because it seems like you are trying to hurry up and get to everything else. I absolutely love the sequence of line which talked about his friend that he has to reprioritize, who wasn't really in his life during the passing of his mother. And the God of My Life line was like really impacting for me personally. I've also noticed that on many of Andy's projects, time seems to be a reoccurring theme. I mean, you just look at songs like Always in a Rush, Rewind, Now I Know, and one of my favorites, 1988. It just goes to show that not only is time a big fear for a lot of people, but it seems to be one of the greatest fears for creatives like artists and musicians and, you know, YouTube creators. And this leads me perfectly into the next song. This is like the anthem to anyone who feels like life is just getting away from them. It seems like in life you are always encouraged to try, but when you fail at things that you are trying the hardest to do, it almost seems like you have wasted your time trying. Each line just hits as hard, if not harder, than the line that followed it before. I really like the line when he talks about having to stop cussing and he says, "Aw, it," but it's kind of like they censored himself in a way. I thought that was creative. Definitely one of the better cuts on this track, and another one of those heartfelt songs from Andy that just are one of the reasons why he's one of my favorite artists.
Cross my heart.
This was a phenomenal wrap up to this somewhat of a rocky project. Intro and outro songs are the most important songs on any musical project in my personal opinion, and typically some of my most favorite songs are the intro and outro songs on pretty much any project, and Andy has always done very well at introducing and exiting his albums with some of his, what I think are his best songs ever. He comes to clarity on much of the topics that he tackled on this album and previous albums before, and once again, time seems to be that big theme that he is most upfront about. The final recurrence of that childlike voice, which I think is supposed to represent himself saying, "Andy, you didn't forget me," sort of like congratulating him that he still embraces like the childlike aspects of himself. And then the final words from his mother were really just beautifully placed on this project, and I felt like it was an absolute great way to end this project.
Yo, Pierre, you wanna come out here?
So when it comes to my final thoughts on the album, this was a peculiar listen for me at the start, because it seemed to lack some of his typical very direct focuses on the overall themes of his albums like we typically see from him. The tracks on this album that I didn't like were sort of duds or very undercreated for his standards, like I have expressed. But the tracks that I do like on this project were very well produced, very great, and have a lot of what people tend to call replay value. I definitely will return to this album on many occasions, like I have pretty much done with Andy's entire discography. So when it comes to Andy Mineo's Neverland 2, please let me know what you agreed and disagreed with on my review. What are some of the aspects of the album that you absolutely loved, some of the aspects of the album that you hated, some aspects of the album that I didn't touch on enough. Let me know what some of your favorite tracks are, and as always, just like, subscribe, and remember to stay productive and don't act stupid.